seen some of the news reports over the last few years, you know that many African rulers, such as the family of President Obiang in Equatorial Guinea, have bought mansions in the US, the family of the president of Gabon. You can go to nearby Potomac, Maryland, and see some of these properties. And it's important to keep in mind that the US is really providing a lot of enablers for illicit financial flows: the lawyers, the accountants, the consulting firms. Luanda leaks, which I'm sure that Florinda would talk about, was a leak of information about how Isabel dos Santos in Angola was able to work with a global network of consultants, lawyers, bankers, and accountants to help park her assets abroad. And some of these are the leading professional services firms you know of, like PricewaterhouseCoopers. And even though there were obvious red flags about the source of this money, PwC worked with her and at least 20 companies controlled by her and her husband to stash this money away. That's just one example. But it's important to keep in mind that IFFs harm both Americans as well as Africans and people all over the world. In the US, shell companies have been used for human trafficking, to facilitate the work of drug cartels. Anonymous shell companies are used in perpetrating fraud against the US government, including related to COVID relief in the past year. This is something that the FACT Coalition member, Project on Government Oversight, has been highlighting. These anonymous shell companies and IFFs distort real estate markets. Illicit financial flows and money laundering harm US workers. For example, crooks and oligarchs from other countries buying hotels, steel mills, and other properties as a way to park money. The recent leak from FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Intelligence Network in the US, showed how money transferred into the US from a Ukrainian oligarch funded some of his purchases in the US, and they used shell companies set up in Delaware. Just a couple of examples. The city of Cleveland gave $1 million loan to this Ukrainian tycoon for a hotel property in Cleveland. He bought a Kentucky Steel alloy factory. Prices for that have been surging over the last year, but workers have been laid off. So it has real impacts for US workers, for US citizens, and for the US government. As Alvin rightly says, tax evasion costs the US Treasury as well as treasuries around the world. But I think it's important to also note that some change is coming, which I'm happy to talk about, and the FACT Coalition has been at the forefront of that change. What I wanted to highlight today is a recent victory to pass the Corporate Transparency Act, which will largely ban anonymous shell companies from being set up in the US. I joined FACT, as Amani noted, as executive director in November. This was at the tail end of a 10-year plus push to set up a registry of beneficial owners for companies and to end this practice of anonymous shell companies. FACT is a nonpartisan alliance of more than 100 state, national, and international organizations, including Friends of Angola and the US Africa Bridge Building Project more recently. And we really believe that democratic societies are underpinned by fair tax systems, and where tax systems are unfair, corruption and kleptocracy and inequality are the results. So looking at this issue of shell companies, the US enacted the Corporate Transparency Act on January 1st, which will require all companies to report their true beneficial owners to the US government. This information, while not being public, will be available to the US government, but also law enforcement, both in the US and around the world. So there are opportunities for collaboration across borders. The US Corporate Transparency Act simply requires that companies and LLCs and other similar entities, the true owners, disclose their name, date of birth, and other information to identify them. many observers thought this would never happen. And as Alvin said, there's a lot of political opposition to fixing the structural causes of illicit financial flows. But we were able to assemble a broad range of organizations to make this happen. That included anti-corruption groups, environmental groups, international development groups. And I think one of the key lessons here is that getting that broad range of organizations, not simply those groups that are devoted to this particular issue, and finding ways to talk about the issue in ways that are accessible to citizens around the world, and finding new audiences and new messengers.